You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Before the search, there was a meeting that took place of all of those involved in the search, correct?
Yes, there was.
And you were all handed a memorandum which described some of the details of what was going to happen in the search, correct?
I can't say that I remember a memorandum, sir.
It was called an operations plan, was it not?
There was an operations plan, yes, sir.
And it was a printed operations plan that was distributed to people like yourself, correct?
Yes.
Do you recall Michael Jackson being on the property when that search began?
That I have no idea about, sir.
You never saw him, right?
No, sir.
And you certainly never saw Michael Jackson around any of the equipment that you seized, correct?
Object is asked and answered, Your Honor.
I don't remember. Go ahead. You may answer.
I don't recall seeing Mr. Jackson on that day at all, sir.
Okay, so as you sit here today, you don't know if Michael Jackson even knew if the equipment you seized was even on the property, correct?
Calls for speculation, Your Honor.
Overruled. You may answer. Do you want it read back?
No, sir. It would be my opinion that he knew that was there.
Oh, really? Let's explore that a little bit. It's your opinion that Michael Jackson had seen the equipment you seized.
Are you talking books, or the equipment that was used to monitor phone calls, sir?
The equipment that appeared to be capable of monitoring phone calls. Tell us. Tell the jury, when you ever saw Michael Jackson looking at that equipment.
I can't say that I ever saw him looking at it. It was in his office, sir.
And tell the jury if you ever found his fingerprints on that equipment.
I did not have the equipment fingerprinted, sir.
And Mr. Jackson wasn't there that day, was he?
No, he was not.
Tell the jury how many security personnel work at Neverland.
That I don't know, sir.
You were told security is heavy at Neverland, correct?
I was told that there was heavy security, yes.
Okay, and by heavy security, what did you mean? What do you think it meant?
That there could have been several security personnel on scene, on the ranch.
How many did you see?
I didn't see any.
Didn't see any at all?
No, sir.
Even from the time you went into Neverland?
I did not see anybody from security, sir.
From Neverland security, right?
Yes, sir.
Did you see a security shed as you entered?
At the gate, as you enter onto the property, yes, sir, there is a security gate with a security shed. Yes, sir.
Okay, alright. Have you ever seen Mr. Jackson in that office area?
No, sir.
Do you know how often Mr. Jackson is even in that office area on a typical day?
No, I do not.
Okay. Is there any reason why you never called the name on that card that was found with the equipment?
Yes, sir.
What's the reason?
That was not my responsibility. It was not part of my investigation.
Okay. Do you know whether or not that card suggested that somebody came over with a proposal on what they could do with that equipment?
I never 28,374. Considered that, no, sir.
Okay. Do you know whether or not Mr. Jackson's even an expert on security systems?
I do not know.
Okay, let's get back to the library. You said the door was unlocked, true?
No, sir.
What did you say?
You never asked me that.
I never asked you if there was any security system to get into the library.
I don't believe you asked me that, sir.
Okay, I'll ask it now.
The door was locked.
The door was locked.
Into the library, yes, sir.
How was it unlocked, so you could get in?
Somebody from the ranch was escorted, I believe was escorted on, and the door was opened.
Did you watch them unlock the door?
No, I did not.
So it was unlocked when you showed up to do the search, correct?
Yes.
Okay, now, you went into the arcade area, correct?
The library is a portion of the arcade, yes, sir.
Okay, how did you get into the arcade?
The front door. That door I was talking about was the front door into the arcade. That was unlocked.
Okay, was it unlocked when you showed up to the door to go in for the search?
Yes, sir.
As you walked through the arcade area, did you find that every door you wanted to go through was unlocked?
No, I did not find that.
Did you find that there was some locks that had to be unlocked?
Yes, sir.
And you asked for a locksmith, didn't you?
I did not. No, sir.
Would it refresh your recollection if I show you a police report that says you need a locksmith in the arcade?
It might, but I don't recall that we needed a locksmith.
Might it refresh your recollection to show you the report?
Sure.
May I approach, Your Honor?
I still don't recall that we needed a locksmith, but I'll look at the report.
Okay.
It does say, Sergeant Abel needs a locksmith in the arcade, and that was at 1200 hours. And I believe I remember what that was in reference to now.
Okay, so you've seen the report, right?
Yes, sir.
Does it refresh your recollection about your needing a locksmith in the arcade?
Yes.
And what did that refer to?
There was a locked box on the back of a door in the security. Not in a security. There was, if you went through the arcade, there was a storage area in the back of the arcade. And on the back of the door of that door to the storage area, there was a metal security box that I asked for a locksmith to come and open.
Okay, you went into the wine cellar, correct?
Yes.
How did you get down there?
There was a large jukebox-type arcade machine in the way. We moved that jukebox out of the way, went down the stairs to the bottom door where you would enter the cellar.
Did you have to unlock the door in the wine cellar to get in?
I didn't, but it needed to be unlocked. It was locked.
Okay, do you know who unlocked it?
Somebody from the ranch, I believe.
Okay, and as you testified, you found alcoholic beverages in the wine cellar, true?
In the kitchen area of the wine cellar, yes.
Okay, is that the only area you found alcoholic beverages?
No, sir.
Where else did you find alcoholic beverages?
There was alcoholic beverages in the library.
Okay, what did you find? Excuse me, what alcoholic beverages did you find in the library?
There was a small bottle of, I forget what name of the type of vodka that was on one of the racks that was open, and there was a small amount left in it.
Okay, what did you do with that bottle?
I asked Detective Cooley to examine the bottle and see if it should be retained as evidence, and I left it at that point.
Do you know if it ever was retained as evidence?
It was not.
Okay, do you know why?
I don't know why.
Do you know if anybody ever tried to fingerprint the bottle?
I do not know.
Do you know if anybody tried to fingerprint any of the bottles that you found?
I do not recall that anybody tried to fingerprint any of the bottles, no, sir.
And did you ever request anybody try to fingerprint any bottles that you located?
No, sir.
Okay, you talked about going into an area called a museum, right?
I believe I said it was a museum, office where Mr. Jackson, it was a combination. I'm not sure exactly what it was called. It was called.
What made you?
That night we called it both the office and the museum, and then it referred to the office.
What made you refer to that area as a museum?
It had statuettes, figures. It had a lot of memorabilia in. As you walked through a door, there was an open area. Not an open area. It was an area where there was a lot of statues, memorabilia, etc., in that area. And then it entered into a hallway and back to what appeared to be an office area.
And how big an area was the museum?
Just a rough estimate was 20 foot by 20 foot, maybe.
And you're calling the museum the office, is that true?
Yes.
And it goes without saying, when you told the jury, his office, you were also telling the jury, his museum, correct?
I think I said that, but, yes.
Okay, you used the words interchangeably, correct?
Yes.
If you call it an office, is it a pretty big office?
The office area that I recall that was on the back of the museum was a pretty big office area, yes, sir.
And when you refer to statues, are you talking about big statues?
They were life-sized, lifelike, life-sized, yes.
And lots of them, right?
You know, there was quite a few. Looking through there, you had to walk around them and be careful that you didn't knock them over. So there was some in there, yes, sir.
You don't know if other individuals besides Mr. Jackson entered or used that area, true?
I don't know.
Okay, and nobody ever checked to find out, correct, to your knowledge?
That would have been another part of the investigation. I had no part in that.
Okay, Did you videotape the areas you searched?
I personally did not, but I had them videotaped.
Okay. Did you have the items you seized videotaped?
I'm not sure if those items were exactly what you call videotaped. There was a videotaping of the premises that were searched prior to the search and after the search. During the search, the items that were received were photographed.
Okay. Now, in the area that you called the museum in the office, you saw various televisions, correct?
There were. I'm not sure if you would classify them exactly as televisions, but there were large television-type screens, plasma-type television screens. There was several of them, yes, sir.
You can see them actually from outside the building, can't you?
That part one don't know.
Okay. Where did you first see them?
In that, what I call Mr. Jackson's office area.
Okay. Alright. No further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Yes. Detective Abel, you've been asked a lot of questions by Mr. Mesereau about camera security equipment. I want you to take a look again at People's 717. All right.
Yes, sir.
The equipment that's in that particular case, does it relate to cameras or does it relate to telephone monitoring equipment?
The majority of the equipment that's in there refers to or is associated with telephone monitoring equipment.
Okay. And I'm not talking about the paperwork. I'm talking about the actual equipment itself.
There is one small cigarette lighter that has also a camera in it that is also in a package inside there.
Okay. So except for that small little camera inside of what did you call it, a cigarette lighter?
It's a camera disguised as a cigarette lighter.
Other than that, everything else in there deals with telephonic monitoring, is that correct?
Telephonic and remote, covert microphones to monitor conversations, yes.
Now, with regard to the telephone monitoring system itself, are you familiar with whether some of that equipment can be voice-activated?
Yes, it can.
Tell the jury what it means to voice-activate a telephonic monitoring system.
It would mean that the tape recorder that is inside the case would. It could be set to run continuously or to only run when there is voice conversation. Voice-activated.
Now, you indicated I think in your testimony both to Mr. Mesereau and before, there are items in there called alligator clips, is that correct?
Yes, there are.
Now, with regard to the monitoring or the taping of telephone conversations, how does an alligator clip work? Where is it? What is it affixed to?
Objection. Foundation.
Just a moment.
I think he said he's not an expert, Your Honor.
Are you asking him about generally or about this equipment?
This equipment, Your Honor. And particularly telephonic. Not security systems in general, which is what I think Mr. Mesereau asked.
All right. I'll allow the question as to this piece of equipment.
Are you asking me what the alligator clips are attached to now or what they could be?
Well, they're not attached to anything in there right now, are they?
They're attached, well, the clips themselves are not. The other end of them is.
What are they attached to?
Looks like it's a 4-pronged device that I associate with a telephone that has 4 prongs on it.
I'll tell you what, let's stop right there. Open up the case and show us what you mean. It's probably easier than to have you do it with your fingers.
There's a plastic bag, Ziploc plastic bag inside the case, with some batteries, different sized batteries. There's an electrical plug device. And then there's a phone cord that would attach to a phone receptacle. And this just pops off, but it was on here. And it has alligator clips on there. And then these two were not attached to anything. These are alligator clips inside that open up.
And how do the alligator clips work in connection with the taping of conversation or monitoring?
All right. Your objection was that he's not qualified to.
That's correct, Your Honor.
All right. I'll sustain that objection.
I was just laying the foundation. In your role as a narcotics investigator, were you trained with regard to electronic surveillance?
Yes, sir.
And in particular with regard to telephonic surveillance, telephonic monitoring?
Yes, sir. I was instructed by the Department of Justice, State of California, on wiretap investigations.
And how many such investigations have you done?
I've been associated with 3 of those type investigations.
And this is where individuals who are suspects of criminal activity had their individual telephone calls monitored.
Objection. Leading.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes, sir.
Based upon your training and your experience, can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, in your opinion, how are those alligator clips used to monitor or tape telephone conversations?
Same objection, Your Honor.
Overruled. You may answer.
The alligator clips on the bottom end could be utilized in what you call a phone junction box to clip onto the connections for the telephone.
And to your knowledge, is that activity legal in California?
No, it is not.
All right, I just have one last question. Mr. Mesereau asked you why you think that Mr. Jackson knew that equipment that he knew about that equipment. And you answered you thought he did. What was the basis of your opinion?
It's been asked and answered, Your Honor.
Overruled. You may answer.
It was in his office where the majority of items that I believed belonged to him were. There were allegations that the family involved was concerned that their phone calls while they were at Neverland Ranch were being monitored.
All right. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Recross.
Do you know whether or not Mr. Jackson has ever had concerns that his children might be threatened or kidnapped at Neverland?
I do not.
Do you know anything about threats by anybody around the world to ever do that to Mr. Jackson or his children?
I can't say personally I know about that, no.
When you went into Neverland to search, did you have any understanding of any security measures Mr. Jackson has ever used to protect he or his family?
Your Honor, I'm going to object as beyond the scope of redirect. My redirect, well, I won't.
Sustained.
Now, you just told the jury about alligator clips, correct?
Yes, sir.
Did you discuss alligator clips with Prosecutor Sneddon, Prosecutor Zonen and Prosecutor Auchincloss at your meeting this morning?
Yes.
Why didn't you tell that to the jury when I was asking you questions?
When? Today, or yesterday, or Thursday?
Today. Remember I asked you about the meeting you had, and you started off by saying it was only 5 minutes.
Yes, sir.
Remember I asked you what was discussed?
Yes, sir.
Why didn't you tell the jury you discussed alligator clips with these prosecutors for the government?
Well, I think you asked me if there was questions in a discussion, and I think what I was referring to was a discussion we had back and forth. I discussed earlier today. I indicated to them that there was that device in the case. There was no question that they asked me about it. I just indicated that it was in there.
When you had your meeting this morning with the 3 prosecutors for the government, did you discuss the camera inside the lighter?
No, I did not.
What else did you talk to them about in this 5-minute meeting?
I don't recall that we discussed much more than what I have explained.
Did you just suddenly remember it?
Your Honor, I'm going to object as argumentative.
I'll withdraw the question. Do you consider yourself an expert on how this particular piece of equipment is utilized?
I would say that I'm familiar with it, but I'm not an expert on it, no, sir.
Have you ever used this equipment yourself?
This equipment?
Yes.
No, I have not.
Have you ever repaired equipment like that yourself?
No, I have not.
Have you ever installed equipment like that yourself?
No, sir.
Now, last Thursday, you weren't sure whether that equipment could be purchased lawfully by any citizen. Remember that?
Yes.
Have you done any research on that area since last Thursday?
Yes.
Why didn't you say that this morning when I asked you if you'd investigated any further what you talked about last Thursday?
It was an internet search. And I should have said it, but I didn't, yes.
Okay. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you. May the record reflect that I'm looking at the documents that are contained in with this piece of equipment that were discussed last Thursday.
All right.
Thank you, Your Honor. Since you testified last Thursday, have you reviewed the documents that were found with this equipment?
No, sir. They've been in this case.
Did you review them this morning?
No, sir.
Did you discuss them with the prosecutors this morning?
I believe we just discussed them. I believe I explained to them what I thought that the diagram was referring to, that you have in your hand there, regarding the cameras in the clocks and the cameras in the smoke alarm, etc.
You talked to the prosecutors about that this morning.
I think I may have mentioned it.
And did you discuss the document that's titled, Video Surveillance System with Audio?
I believe I mentioned it, yes.
To the prosecutors this morning at the meeting?
Yes.
Did you mention to them the reference to clock video camera?
I believe I mentioned that the diagram had and mentioned the clock, the small alarm, and the reference to infrared.
Did you think this all related solely to a telephone monitoring system?
I didn't believe that related to a telephone monitoring system.
What do you think it relates to?
A covert surveillance system used to videotape would be any room that it would be set up in.
It talks about miniature cameras in that document, correct?
I'd have to look at it again. I don't know for sure.
It talks about transmitters, correct?
I'm going to object as beyond the scope of redirect.
Overruled. You may answer.
Right.
Ask me that again.
Let me rephrase the question. I withdraw that. Did you and Prosecutor Sneddon meet this morning and discuss your testimony at all?
Yes.
Did you discuss what you were going to say this morning in response to Prosecutor Sneddon's questions?
No.
Did you discuss this idea that you were going to limit your answers to, for lack of a better word, a telephone monitoring system?
There was no discussion about that at all, sir.
Okay, and when did you last look at these documents that you found with that piece of evidence?
It would have been last Thursday during the testimony.
Are you telling the jury that, based upon your background, training and expertise, that piece of equipment only relates to a telephone monitoring system?
Yes.
Are you telling the jury that it doesn't have any relationship whatsoever to a video surveillance system?
Not the equipment in here, sir.
Have you ever used equipment like that?
Yes, I have.
When did you last use it?
It would have been several years ago, but I have used it.
When you found that equipment with an investigator's card and with documents that appeared to scheme out a video monitoring system in an audio monitoring system, did it ever occur to you that someone may have been discussing different types of surveillance systems with respect to that equipment?
I never believed that, no.
Did you see the document that said, video briefcase surveillance system with audio? Did you see that?
Yes.
What do you think that refers to?
I'd have, just by the wording, it would be that somebody could utilize the equipment in that briefcase to covertly tape record and/or monitor conversations.
When you saw the schematic that says, video surveillance system, did it occur to you somebody may have been making a proposal for a video surveillance system?
That was not a consideration that I had, no, sir.
When you saw another document that's entitled, Remote Room Audio Monitor, with prices and with schematics, did it ever occur to you that somebody may have been making some proposals for a room audio monitoring system?
You keep mentioning the word proposal, but I never considered that was a proposal, sir.
When you saw a document that gave a price list for Portable Electronic Surveillance Countermeasures Kit, did it ever occur to you that somebody might be making a proposal for the purchase of a Portable Electronic Surveillance Countermeasures Kit?
As you say, proposal, I never considered that, no, sir.
So just putting two and two together, an investigator's card, a piece of evidence like that, and all of this material dealing with various surveillance systems, it never even entered your mind that somebody might have been trying to present or sell surveillance systems?
No, it was my opinion that this equipment had been purchased possibly from Mr. Lepori by Mr. Jackson and retained and possessed by Mr. Jackson to utilize.
Ever see a purchase receipt?
I can't say that there's a purchase receipt, but there are figures and there is what appears to be a copy of a receipt, a tape, or a register type receipt on there.
Okay. Did you see also register receipts for a Portable Electronic Surveillance Countermeasures Kit?
You'd have to show me all that again. I'd have to look at it.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Have you had a chance to look at that document?
Yes.
Does it appear to have a price list on it?
Yes, it does.
Does it appear to have a typed receipt on it?
Yes.
Does it say at the top, Portable Electronic Surveillance Countermeasures Kit?
Yes.
Are you saying, after looking at that document, it didn't occur to you that maybe somebody was purchasing a security system at Neverland?
I never considered it to be a security system.
Well, why would you look at a document that says, telephonic taping system, with a receipt, and tell the jury you thought that was being purchased, and at the same time look at a separate document that says, Portable Electronic Surveillance Countermeasures Kit, which also has a receipt, and not tell the jury you had the same reaction. Somebody was buying security system equipment, true.
They were buying. That would have been for countermeasures to make sure that they weren't being covertly monitored. The other one goes along with purchasing for covert monitoring and/or tape recording.
What about the video briefcase surveillance system? That's got figures on it also, doesn't it, that document?
Yeah, I would have to look at it again. I don't know for sure.
Sir, the bottom line is, you just saw what you wanted to see, right?
Object as argumentative, Your Honor.
Sustained.
No further questions, Your Honor. Can I just return these documents to the exhibit?
Yes, you may. Anything further from you?
No.
All right, you may step down. Secure that exhibit first, please.
Yes, sir. The document just.
Yeah. Do you want to give him the documents so he can put them in?
Yeah.
Call your next witness.
Call Dr. Anthony Urquiza to the stand, please.
Come to the front of the courtroom, please. When you get to the witness stand, please remain standing. Face the clerk here, and raise your right hand.
I do.
Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
My name is Anthony Joseph Urquiza. The last name is spelled Urquiza.
Thank you.
Dr. Urquiza, all of the witnesses have so far been admonished that you have to stay as close as possible to that microphone or you won't be heard throughout the courtroom.
All right.
What is your current occupation?
I have a couple of titles. I am a psychologist licensed in the state of California. I am Director of Mental Health Services at the Care Center, which is a child abuse treatment program, child physical abuse, sexual abuse treatment program in Sacramento, California. And I am Associate Professor in the Department of Pediatrics at the University of California Davis Medical Center.
Are you on the faculty?
I am on the faculty, yes.
Tell us about the Care Center. What is that?
The Care Center is a medical and mental health treatment agency which provides services, trying to remember to do the microphone, which provides services specifically for children and families in which there has been some type of abuse, either physical abuse, sexual abuse, or neglect. We provide services, at least on the mental health side, to about 400 children and families in any given week.
Is the clinic in association with the University of California?
It is part of the University of California, yes.
And located where?
In Sacramento.
Doctor, what are your qualifications to hold that position?
As I said earlier, I'm licensed in the state of California. I am a psychologist, and I have 3 degrees that I have earned to enable me to identify myself as a psychologist.
What are those degrees?
I have an undergraduate degree in child development. I have a master's degree in clinical psychology, and a doctorate, or a PhD, in clinical psychology.
How long have you held the position you currently hold?
I started in January of 1990. So 15 years, approximately.
And how long have you been a psychologist?
About 1988. It was around 1988. I don't remember the exact year.
And how long have you been working in the child care field, particularly mental care for children with some form of disability or children who have been abused?
Well, that's 2 parts. The disability part actually goes back to the mid-70s. I started working with children in the mid-70s. But I made a decision to work and to focus my career specifically on the issue of child abuse or child maltreatment somewhere around 1982, 1983. And then I entered graduate school in 1983.
If you can, tell the jury your history, beginning with that period of time back in the 70s when you first started working in this field, and give us a brief summary of your career from that time.
Sure. For a long time I've worked in the area, or with children. Again, going back to about 1973. Around 1979, I took a position at Children's Hospital in Seattle on their inpatient psych unit where children with significant and serious mental health problems were admitted to that hospital for diagnosis and treatment. I realized there that one of the big common denominators of kids who had serious mental health problems was this history of maltreatment in their childhood or in their lives. And so around that time, in roughly from about 1980 to 83, I decided that that was going to be a career goal for me, and so I applied for it and entered graduate school at the University of Washington. The program that I was in was a combination of a clinical program where they teach you to be a therapist or an evaluator, a research program, where they teach you to do the research in a particular area, and my research was in child abuse, and teacher or faculty somewhere. And so I graduated around 1988. I had a brief teaching position in the Department of Family Studies at San Diego State University. And then in 1990, I assumed the position of being responsible for all of the mental health services at the care center, which again is within the Department of Pediatrics at UC Davis Medical Center, and have held that position since 1990 to current. Those three things, research, teaching and clinical practice, I have been doing continuously, actually since I started entering graduate school, although the treatment of children I stopped a couple of years ago. The reason being was that in order to see treatment of children in treatment, you need to be able to make a regular appointment with them every Thursday at 4 o'clock, and my schedule really prevented me from doing that. I didn't think it was fair to the children that I was providing services to. But I continued to evaluate children, and probably over the course of my career have seen several thousand children in therapy or in evaluation.
Now, your current position is director of this clinic, is that correct?
Director of Mental Health Services, yes.
What does that mean? What do you do?
Well, a portion of my job is administration. A portion of my job is research. But the bulk of my responsibilities are overseeing the mental health services, which is psychological treatment or evaluation of my staff. And the staff is about 45 or 50 people that I'm responsible for. And so sometimes I provide direct services. Again, no longer therapy, but I continue to evaluate children and families. Sometimes I provide direct supervision. That is, I have some staff people who are seeing clients, and my job is to supervise them. And then a portion of my responsibility is to supervise my supervisors. So it's sort of a second level where I supervise about 6 of my staff who then provide supervision for direct frontline service.
Doctor, you tell us you also do research and have continued to do research. What does that mean?
And I can answer that specific to my field, which is child abuse and family violence. One of the things that we have been trying to do is to move knowledge forward with some empirical or research foundation. And so typically it means undergoing a methodological process where we acquire data, we analyze those data, and we make some determination or interpretation of the data. Then the last part of it is we write the results up and submit it for publication in a book or a journal.
And have you done publications in the course of your academic career?
I do. I have.
Can you give us a sense of what that involves and how many publications, the nature or the type?
I don't know exactly how many. I'd say 35 to 45 publications, at least. That's an estimate. I don't keep track of that. And they're all, or mostly on issues of child abuse. Some of the areas, well, there's been an overriding theme to the research that I do. One of the things that happens with a child who's been abused is that it has a disruption in their capacity to have positive and healthy relationships as they grow older.
Objection. Non-responsive.
It's about the nature of the publications.
Sustained.
Can you tell us if there is a common theme to the publications that you have written?
Yes.
And what is that?
This issue of relationships, which is fundamental to healthy development in children, is disrupted when children are physically or sexually abused or neglected. And so that has been the common theme. In what way does sexual abuse or physical abuse or neglect impact their developing capacity to have satisfactory relationships in adolescence, peer relationships, even into adulthood, in being able to have satisfactory marital relationships? That has been a consistent theme. I've also been interested in methodological issues, how to conduct good research related to child abuse. And I've also been very interested in ethnic minority issues as they apply to different types of child mental treatment.
You teach as well, do you?
I do, yes.
And where?
Within the Department of Pediatrics and usually within the care center. But I think teaching encompasses more than. I should back up a little bit. I don't teach in a classroom setting. I used to when I was at San Diego State. I now teach people to be psychologists or social workers, to be professionals. And so I teach in the capacity of supervision, seminars, training. I also teach in workshops, in conferences that are beyond the medical center and throughout the United States and sometimes even internationally.
And do you deliver papers in conjunction with those lectures?
I do, yes.
And what types of papers are we talking about?
Pretty much the same as the research publications: the effects of abuse on children, the impact abuse has on developing relationships. Again, issues of methodology, as well as the impact of abuse on people of color.
I think that you had said earlier that you have seen perhaps 1,000 children or more in the course of your career.
Who have been abused?
Yes.
Probably, certainly more than 1,000 children who have been abused. Several thousands who have been either physically abused, sexually abused or neglected during the course of my life that I have provided service to. That would be much larger when you incorporate people that I supervise. But for direct service, certainly a few thousand people.
What percentage of them, in your opinion, are victims of child sexual abuse?
That I have seen.
Yes.
I'd say at least a third. I mean, I'd say, again, I don't keep numbers as to how many, but I'd estimate maybe 1,000 children, or at least 1,000 children that I have provided service to, either therapy or evaluation, during the course of my career.
All right. You've been at the University of California and it's at Davis, is that correct?
Well, it's University of California Davis Medical Center. The medical center itself, the teaching classrooms where you go to learn to be a doctor, is in Davis. But the medical center where you actually practice is in Sacramento.
And you've taught at other universities or state colleges prior to that?
As I said earlier, I've taught at San Diego State University. And I taught at the University of Washington as a graduate student.
And how long have you been in association with the University of California at this point?
About 15 years.
Doctor, have you ever been appointed by the court to be an expert in any type of court matter?
Yes.
Have you ever testified in conjunction with those appointments?
Yes.
All right. What types of appointments do you receive and have you received by the court over the years?
In juvenile court I have been appointed usually through court order by a judge to evaluate some aspect of a case that's in the child welfare system. Child welfare being children who are either part of the foster care system or entry into or exiting the child welfare system. So I'm appointed by the court, and then usually asked to do an evaluation to answer a question that the court may need, and then afterwards to testify about that case in court.
What types of cases would you typically be appointed to? What types of issues do you address?
Issues of parental competency, issues of placement for a child who's been abused, issues of adoption, graduation out of foster care system, certainly issues related to how to manage a child who has some type of severe psychopathology that is difficult to address.
Have you ever been retained by either the prosecution or the defense in criminal proceedings dealing with allegations of child sexual abuse?
I have, yes.
Can you give us a sense of how many times you've been retained by either side?
Again, an estimate would be about 85 times for a criminal matter.
All right. Can you tell us what percentage of that you're retained by the prosecution, what percentage by the defense?
Most of that has been for the prosecution. Probably be about 4 or 5 times that I've actually testified for the defense. Although I'm contacted by the defense, probably only 4 or 5 times that I have actually gone to court and testified for the defense.
All right. When you're testifying on behalf of the prosecution, do you ever address the issue of child sexual assault accommodation syndrome?
Yes.
And have you been asked to do that on this occasion here today?
That's my understanding, yes.
Tell us, what is child sexual assault accommodation syndrome?
Sure. That syndrome is really a phrase that's the title of an article or coined in an article by a man by the name of Roland Summit, who is a psychiatrist I believe at the University of Southern California. It was published quite some time ago, in 1983, in their Journal of Child Abuse and Neglect. The reason he wrote this article was specifically for therapists who would be treating children who are sexually abused to dispel any misperceptions or myths that they had, so they would be better able to understand what really happened with children who are sexually abused and then to be able to treat them better. The child sexual abuse accommodation syndrome has 5 parts or components. I'll just identify them. They are a sense of secrecy, helplessness, entrapment and accommodation, delayed and unconvincing disclosure, and then the last one is retraction.
Tell us what the first one means, secrecy.
In order to understand the concept of secrecy, actually in order to understand how children respond to being sexually abused, it's important to understand the context in which abuse occurs, and the context is a relationship between a perpetrator and a victim. One of the misperceptions that occurs or myths that occur with sexual abuse is that children are sexually abused by somebody who they don't know. That's just not the case. Most children, by far, most children are sexually abused by somebody with whom they have an ongoing relationship, not a stranger. That's important because it sets up the dynamics for this issue of secrecy. Children tell us, and the research supports, that there is usually some type of mandate imposed upon the child to keep them quiet about the abuse, hence, the term, secrecy. This mandate can be something like a threat of physical aggression or threat of coercion of some type. It can also be special attention, special favors, bribes. And it can also be misinformation or informing the child of the bad consequences that would occur should they disclose all part of this mandate or this coercion meant to keep kids quiet so they don't disclose. What Dr. Summit said, that is a part of this idea called secrecy.
Explain to us how special attention or favors somehow translates to secrecy.
With sexual abuse, you don't have to physically assault a child to molest them. In fact, that happens fairly infrequently. Coercion and manipulation is probably a much more effective strategy. And what kids tell us happens is that a relationship is established between them and the perpetrator. It may be a very positive, fun, enjoyable relationship, in which the child is put in a position where they like, or in some cases, especially in an interfamilial situation, an incest situation, they may actually love the perpetrator. And then that is supported by things like special attention, favors, doing special things or activities with the child, all aimed at creating an environment where the child will feel very positively, very warmly, very affectionately toward the perpetrator.
Helplessness, the second one, what does that mean?
Helplessness. It's easier to start with the misperception.
Yes, please.
The misperception is if you're a child and you're sexually abused, you're being sexually abused, that you will be able to fend off the perpetrator. You'll be able to do something to protect yourself so that you won't be abused. And that just doesn't happen. We are not. The research actually shows quite clearly when children are presented with a perpetrator who is bigger, stronger, more worldly, has more resources, that they are not able to fend off and protect themselves. And the phrase that I usually use is to ensure their own sexual safety. They're not able to keep themselves from being sexually abused.
Do children understand a need to do that?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, you said that they're not equipped to do that. Does that mean that they understand at the time that they actually need to do that?
To protect themselves.
Yes.
Well, depending upon the age, they may not fully appreciate the inappropriateness of the sexual activity between them and the perpetrator. Or they may be vulnerable to distortions, or lies, or miscommunication, or maybe misinformation on the part of the perpetrator. That this is okay, or this behavior is okay within the context like, you and I can do this, but we're not supposed to tell anybody else, giving the child the impression that, I can't tell anybody, but maybe this is not such a bad thing.
Number 3, I think you said entrapment accommodation. Tell us what that means, please.
It's two parts. And it's two parts because in the entrapment part, if you're a child who's being sexually abused, and you can't tell anybody about it, that's the secrecy. And you can't do anything about it to stop yourself from being victimized, that's the helplessness sense. And then you're stuck. You're trapped. Dr. Summit uses maybe a fancier word of entrapment. And the reason why that's two parts is, if you're in that situation and you can't do anything about it, then what do you do? Hence, the word accommodation. I think an easier word than accommodation is coping. Kids learn to cope with the experience of being sexually abused because they have no other alternative. They have to learn how to manage the feelings that they have about their victimization, and those feelings can be really difficult. Those include shame and embarrassment, humiliation. Sometimes they will be traumatized. All of those are very difficult to manage, and that's part of what the accommodation process does, is enable the child to manage a difficult situation that may be unbearable at times.
Delayed unconvincing disclosure. What does that mean?
Again, that's one that has two parts to it.
Yes.
The misperception is a good place to start. The common belief is if you're a child and you're being abused, then you will immediately, as soon as it happens, you'll immediately go tell your mom, or your dad, your teacher, your best friend, someone. And that really doesn't happen very often, and that's why it's the misperception. It is common that children have a delay, and often a significant delay in disclosure from the first time of abuse to when they're eventually able to disclose. There are now actually several studies that have looked at this issue of delayed disclosure. And one that I often cite is by Diana Elliott and John Breer, which found that from the time of the first incident of abuse to when the child discloses, that about 3/4 of them had failed to disclose within the first 12 months.
Excuse me, 12 months.
12 months.
Thank you.
So most kids don't disclose right away. What that means is that clearly there's a delay in disclosure. What I think that also means is, whatever that mandate or coercion that was imposed on the child, that secrecy part, must have been pretty strong if it keeps most kids quiet for at least a year. Now, there's also a fair amount of research that would suggest that somewhere between 30 and 50% of children fail to disclose in their childhood. That is, they may keep the secret of their victimization quiet until their adulthood, which again supports this notion that there's a significant delay in disclosure.
What are the issues that a child deals with in determining whether or not to disclose that they've been a victim of child sexual abuse? What do they wrestle with, kids?
Well, I'll start by telling you that I often tell kids when I'm in therapy with them that it was a courageous thing for them to do, because they are overcoming a lot of issues. They may be overcoming threats. They may be overcoming a sense that they're going to get in trouble if they disclose. Lots of times kids feel like they're not going to be believed. They'll disclose to somebody and, they'll get blamed for what happened. For a lot of children, especially males, there's this issue of stigma attached to homosexuality. That is, most perpetrators are male. And so for a male victim, not only do they have all of these other issues about being afraid to disclose, but if they disclose, the people will think that they're gay, that they're homo. I mean, those are the kinds of things that are teased or ridiculed by adolescents or peers. And so it becomes a very difficult thing. In addition to that, it matters who they disclose to. It's a hard thing to talk about. I mean, we can sort of think about it as adults retrospectively, but I think it's more important to try to think about it in the frame of a child. It's a really hard thing to tell somebody something that may be humiliating or embarrassing and traumatizing, especially if it would involve penises and vagina and oral copulation and sodomy. Those types of things are incredibly difficult, and so kids have to overcome a lot of barriers to be able to say that to somebody, and they often pick on somebody that they feel will be supportive of their disclosure when they initially start to make disclosures, somebody that they feel that they can trust.
What situation would pose the greatest likelihood of a disclosure? What's the combination of factors that would most encourage a disclosure?
A child that would promote a disclosure.
Yes.
A child who is disclosing to somebody who they felt, with some confidence, would be attentive, caring, responsive. Wouldn't be blameful. Wouldn't say, well, okay, you had it coming, or, this is all your fault. Perhaps somebody who would be believing of the position that they're taking by disclosing. It can be a lot of different types of people, but generally it would be somebody who the child had some trust or confidence in.
All right. Are kids concerned about whether they would be believed? Is that one of the issues that they deal with?
Very much so, yes.
Now, would you expect that a child who does disclose having been a victim of sexual abuse, that child would disclose to their closest relative?
If they perceive that closest relative to be somebody that they had confidence in, that would be, somebody that they felt would be positively responsive to them.
Do you have a sense of how many children actually do disclose to parents as opposed to other persons, friends, teachers, therapists?
Well, that's one of the tough issues. As a researcher, if we were able to have a better understanding of the process of disclosure, we'd be able to facilitate those kids who have been sexually abused to be able to disclose more frequently. The problem is, there are lots of different people who children could disclose to. I mean, sometimes it's a mom. Sometimes it's a dad. Tends infrequently to be dads. Many times it may be a best friend, or a counselor, a therapist. It could be a lot of different people. That's why I say that the common denominator tends to be somebody that the child has some confidence in that they would be trusted, trustworthy and supportive of their disclosure.
Are kids at all concerned about the reaction of the person who would be the recipient of this disclosure? In other words, how they would take it, how they would handle it?
Certainly.
Is that a factor that may be different with a parent than it would be for, say, a mental health professional?
It could. I mean, usually kids are not particularly concerned. As a mental health professional, they're not concerned with how I receive information. Whereas they may be concerned with how a mother or a father, big sister, big brother may receive that information.
How about a child who is? We've dealt a little bit with the child who voluntarily comes forward on their own, his or her own. How about a child that is confronted by an allegation of having been a victim of sexual abuse? What are the issues that a child deals with? In other words, it's not a voluntary effort by the child to give a communication of an abuse to another person, but, rather, another person directly asking that child. What are the issues that a child deals with when they are asked questions about whether or not they have been abused?
Well, in addition to all those other things that I mentioned about how it's difficult and they have to overcome a lot of the barriers about shame, humiliation, feeling they can get blamed for it or be responsible, in addition to all those, there may well be a natural process by which kids are able to disclose being sexually abused. And if somebody were to just come up and say, were you sexually abused? They may not be able to make that disclosure because they weren't at that place where they could make it yet. Maybe 2 years, 5 years from now, they may be able to do it. Also, it goes back to this issue of confidence. If they felt like the person who was asking them about their sexual abuse was supportive and attentive and believable and helpful to them, they may be able to make that disclosure. If they felt like they could get in trouble, that they could be leading into an accusation, if it could be somebody who could get them in trouble for what they said, that would be a tough thing to do.
What is the importance of proper qualifications by the person making the inquiry? In other words, is there such a thing as proper qualifications for a person inquiring of a child as to whether or not that child has been abused?
Well, there are. In California, we have what we call multidisciplinary interview centers, MDICs. There are places where children who have been alleged to have been abused go to be interviewed, and in California there is a rather extended training program to be evidentiary interviewers. Aside from some of the evidentiary issues, there's a lot of effort trying to make these people be supportive, to be the kinds of people who are easy in developing rapport, who kids like, are friendly, are comfortable. So the notion is if you can create that type of supportive, caring, attentive person, you can overcome some of the barriers that kids may have who don't want to disclose. So that really speaks to the issue of having people who are trained and skilled be able to ask questions or ask deep questions about whether a child has been abused or not.
Doctor, does it make a difference, in your opinion, the gender of the child in terms of the ease with which they can give a disclosure of sexual abuse?
Yes.
In what way? Explain that to us.
It goes back a little bit to what I said earlier. The basic issue is I think it's more difficult for males to disclose than it is for females. Because on top of all of the traditional difficulties, the basic barriers that I described, since most perpetrators are male, and if you happen to have a male victim, you also have the stigma or the potential exposure to ridicule and embarrassment because you'll be identified as gay or homosexual. I mean, those things get tagged onto a child. And particularly at certain ages, that could be very difficult to cope with.
What kinds of ages?
Developmentally, a lot of early adolescents, males and females, go through a period where it's difficult to clearly sort through their sexual orientation, the sexual feelings, sexual desires. I mean, most of us, as early adolescents, recall the sense of the early sexual feelings that we have.
Early adolescence is about what age?
Starting probably around 10 or 11, going up through, I'd say, 13, 14, 15 years of age, varying. But to probably be more specific, 11 to 14, where you start having sexual feelings, you start having rather focused attention on the opposite or sometimes same sex about having sexual relationships. And it's also a time of a lot of confusion about your sexual orientation, sexual identity. And so to be sexually abused, and then have this issue of whether you are homosexual or not added into a difficult or confusing adolescent time can be very difficult if you're looking at trying to get a child to disclose sexual victimization.
But a child as young as 11 actually understands the consequences of being stigmatized as gay or homosexual.
Oh, certainly. I've seen a lot of kids, much younger than 11, who would tease each other about being gay because of clothes that they wear, because of, a haircut or hairstyles, or because of behaviors that they were doing. Maybe a boy walks too effeminately, and they would be teased about being gay. Even younger than 11.
Okay. Doctor, when a child does disclose for the first time, is it your experience, your expectation that that child would disclose each and every fact and piece of information about the molestation in its entirety on the first disclosure?
No.
Explain that to us, please.
No. I have to remember this microphone thing.
Yeah. We all have to do that.
No. It's actually quite uncommon that a child would make a disclosure and fully and clearly articulate everything that happened in their sexual victimization experience and be able to do that with detail. That doesn't happen very often.
What are the issues that impact a child? I mean, what happens to a child who's giving a disclosure for the first time?
Well, what we're talking about with regard to the child sexual abuse accommodation syndrome, what we're talking about is that fourth part, because it was delayed and unconvincing disclosure. The unconvincing disclosure is rather than thinking of the disclosure of sexual abuse as an event, or as an act, it's better to think of it as a process. That is, it's the process of overcoming a lot of those barriers and fears about what would happen when they disclosed. And the research supports the notion that kids often will, when they finally get around to being able to make a disclosure, will make a statement, and it may be a relatively vague statement. He touched me in a weird way. Or, he touched me and it made me feel uncomfortable, something like that. If the response had been, as I suggested earlier, supportive, then they may feel more able to talk more about what happened and continuing on. As time goes on, if they feel more and more supported in being able to talk about it without fear of retribution, without fear that they're going to get blamed, without fear that any stigma might get attached to them, all of those fears that they have might start to fall away. Then they're eventually able to provide a more complete disclosure. The difficulty is, if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 disclosures, multiple disclosures, and they're not exactly the same, and the research shows us that they're often not the same, then it looks unconvincing, which is why Dr. Summit wrote, 20-some years ago, that kids who are sexually abused go through this process of a disclosure rather than an event.
And referred to it specifically as a process, is that correct?
Yes.
Is that your experience in dealing with the 1,000 or more children that you've dealt with over the years, or that number that have been sexually abused?
Well, it is my experience. But I think more important, that's what's supported by the research. I mean, my experience, and granted, I have seen a lot of children who have been sexually abused, but it is better to rely upon what the research has to say rather than just a single person.
In the course of your dealing with children who have disclosed and the research that you have conducted, is the demeanor of the child at the time of the disclosure something that's interesting to you or relevant to the question of sexual abuse?
You didn't ask me any questions about it, but what that goes to is this issue of accommodation.
Yes.
Past the process of coping with being sexually abused and, again, I'll remind you that the feelings are one of being afraid, embarrassed, humiliated. These are not things that are easy to deal with for a child. One of the things that kids have to do, if they're being sexually abused, especially if it happens more than once, is they have to learn how to manage or shut down those feelings. They have to learn how to in some way separate themselves out. So what happens, and it often happens in therapy, when kids come in and they talk about being abused, they may talk about it in a matter-of-fact way, devoid of feelings. They may come in and, well, he put his penis in there. He moved it in and out. He put his hand here, and it sounds almost cold or clinical. What it really is the child's relaying what they saw, what happened to them, separate from the feelings that they have.
Doctor, a child who's been a victim of sexual abuse, would it be your expectation that each time the child is interviewed, assuming a succession of interviews or even testimonies, would it be your expectation that child would be perfectly consistent about all of the detail each and every time?
The research supports that they are not likely to be consistent. Part of that is just this issue of it's a process in which they feel more comfortable disclosing, so they may give more information. Part of it also is there's some areas in which kids are not attentive to. For example, children don't usually wear watches, and so if you were to ask a child, did it happen at 2:30 or 3:30 in the afternoon? Did it last 35 minutes or 55 minutes? Their orientation to time is different than that of an adult, so they may not be accurate on issues of time. Did it happen on December 13th or December 14th? They don't operate, as some adults do, with calendars that sort of make us guide that, so they may not be exactly accurate. So some of these intangible kinds of things they make mistakes on. Usually the things that they see, they're pretty good at being able to accurately describe. And there's a caveat here, which is after about 4 or 5 years of age, kids are very good at being able to describe what they see and recall and provide that information.
Doctor, let me ask you a couple questions about victims of sexual abuse and their relationship with the offenders. Is it possible for a child to actually have a sincere love and affection for the person who is molesting them?
Certainly.
Explain how that would be.
Well, actually it's not only possible, in some situations it often happens. Going back to this basic issue, even as a part of this sense of secrecy, a relationship is developed between the perpetrator and the victim. And as a part of that relationship, in many instances the child likes this person. It's really difficult to just walk up to somebody and start fondling or molesting them. Usually, as I said earlier, sexual abuse happens in the context, and the context is that relationship. So from the perspective of the child, I like this person, I enjoy doing things with them, they're fun, I like that they like me, I want people to like me, and so the sexual activity becomes an unpleasant, disliked part of a relationship that is bigger, that they, in fact, enjoy. And, for example, in an incest situation, you may have a child who is being sexually abused by a family member. It may comprise a portion of their life that is unpleasant and they don't like and they feel very bad about it, but the needs that they have as a child, the need for a positive affiliation or positive relationship, affection, the need to have somebody who cares about them, they comprise a much larger sense. And it is quite common for kids to sustain a relationship that may be abusive, adding in the fact that there's a secrecy and helplessness they can't do anything about anyway, because the larger scope is that there's this relationship that is very important and they have needs as a child that have to be met.
Doctor, you said the unpleasant part of the molestation itself. Are there ever occasions where it's not unpleasant for a child? That a child actually doesn't view the actual act of molestation with repulsion? That a child might actually find it enjoyable? Does that ever happen?
It does, and in my experience, usually in two situations. One is very unusual, with long-term abuse, where the child sort of becomes a part of the relationship or thinks that the relationship that they may have with the perpetrator is more like boyfriend, girlfriend. I've had some clients who said, I don't want to disclose because he's my boyfriend, and they were 11 and the perpetrator was 35. So it was an abusive relationship, but their perception was that it was not. The other one is with certain situations with sexual abuse with males, particularly with oral copulation. It is confusing, or I should say, my experience when kids come to therapy, one of the common confusions that they have is, I didn't like what happened, it was embarrassing or humiliating, but it felt good, and I don't know what to do about that. And the basic issue is the penis is designed to feel good. It's designed to, if you stimulate it, to get an erection and to have pleasurable feelings. So in the process of oral copulation, if it's stimulated, it may well appear to the child, it may well be a pleasurable feeling. And at the same time, the child has the experience of being embarrassed and humiliated and disgusted by what's going on. It is an odd situation that I have seen in many instances with boys who have been sexually abused.
Is it unusual that a child, a boy, could actually achieve an orgasm or ejaculate during the course of molestation?
Not unusual at all. Again, that's one of the things that penises were designed for. And you stimulate it enough or in a particular way, if they're old enough, they will have an erection and they may well ejaculate.
Doctor, in cultivating a relationship with a child to the point where the child accommodates acts of molestation, are there materials that can be shown to a child that would tend to accommodate that procedure? In other words, allow a child to be able to be more accepting of what's happening to him.
Objection. Leading.
This is an expert witness, Your Honor.
Overruled. You may answer.
Can you ask your question again?
Yes. Is it possible to use certain types of materials with a child that might lessen that child's sexual inhibitions?
Well, as I said earlier, it's a difficult thing to just walk up to a child and stick a hand in their pants and start fondling them. And I don't mean to be crude about it, but that is a good example, because it's likely if you were to do that the child would be offended, repulsed, afraid, and difficult then to follow through and molest that child in a more extensive way. And you don't have to do that. What kids tell us happens is that they have this relationship, it's somebody that they like, somebody that they enjoy spending time with them, and some minor sexual content gets to be a part of the relationship. It may be an off-color joke. It may be a comment about some girl's bottom or breasts who walked by. But it's a minor thing. And then over time, it may be watching an R-rated movie, and making comments about people who don't have clothes on in an R-rated movie. Or even more, introducing the issue of pornographic materials, X-rated magazines, or videos, or touching the child. For example, I had a client once who said that the perpetrator would give them back rubs. And it started with back rubs, and then it gradually, over a period of a couple weeks, progressed to be more and more sexual, where it involves penetration. The point is that what starts as relatively innocuous sexual content, like an off-color joke, gradually increases, desensitizing the child to sexuality, so that eventually when you engage in a more overt sexual behavior, like putting your hand in their pants and touching somebody's penis or vagina, then the child is more comfortable, they're more used to it, and put in this odd situation that, well, okay, you can now get in trouble, because it wasn't just this, but yesterday we were looking at magazines, and we were making these jokes, and looking at these videos.
What happens to, we're now talking about a boy, a young adolescent boy, who is shown porn, who is shown sexually graphic material with visual images, pictures. How does a young boy react to that?
Objection. Foundation and vague.
Overruled. You may answer.
Depending upon the age of the child, we're really talking about stimulation. As I said earlier, There's certain ages in adolescence and early adolescence where there's an increased interest in sexual activity, people of the opposite sex, a lot of confusion, a lot of exploration, a lot of seeking more knowledge, and in some cases experimentation about sexuality. So that could be very exciting, certainly, enticing perhaps.
A 10-year-old boy. Would a 10-year-old boy be old enough to find exciting looking at sexually graphic material?
Certainly.
13-year-old boy.
Certainly.
I'd like to ask you some questions about how a child's behavior. A child who has been exposed to sexual molestation. Are there ways that their behavior thereafter could change?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Is it uncommon for a child to act out in some fashion? A child who's been sexually abused.
That can be very common, yes.
In what ways?
Well, I hate to be stereotypical about this, but in fact it's supported by research. The experience of being sexually abused is distressing, has lots of feelings that are difficult. The way in which boys express distrust tend to be externalizing. The way that girls express distrust tend to be internalizing. What those mean is internalizing tend to be sad, withdrawn, crying, depressed, those types of behaviors. Externalizing behaviors tend to be aggression, acting out, defiance, swearing, name-calling, those kinds of things. So those are common behaviors that we see with children who experience some type of distress or trauma, and also with sexual abuse.
Are there other types of abuse that could lead to that type of behavior as well?
Certainly.
Does it have to be necessarily sexual abuse?
No, it can be neglect, but more likely it could be sexual abuse or physical abuse.
And both of which could manifest that kind of behavior in a young, adolescent boy.
Certainly, yes.
Would that behavior include such things as talking back to teachers?
That would be sort of a poor response to authority.
Getting into fights.
Getting into fights would be one.
Counsel, it's time for our break.
Thank you.